The scent of fear rolled off Naomi Reed's skin like a summer storm as the wolves closed in, their yellow eyes gleaming in the moonlight like deadly lanterns. She had never imagined her journey west would end like this, alone in the wilderness, trembling against the rough bark of a ponderosa pine as a pack of hungry predators tightened their circle. Colorado Territory, 1873. Naomi had left everything behind in Boston: a comfortable life, disappointed parents, and a broken engagement to teach at a frontier school. The stagecoach had broken down 10 miles from her destination, and the driver had encouraged her to walk ahead while he waited for help. "Just follow the trail," he'd said. "You'll reach Silverdale before nightfall." He'd been wrong. Now, as twilight descended over the rugged mountains, Naomi clutched her carpetbag against her chest, her breath coming in frightened gasps. Her navy traveling dress was torn at the hem from her desperate scramble up the hillside when she'd first spotted the wolves. 5 of them. Maybe 6. Too many to count as panic gripped her. The alpha wolf snarled, revealing yellowed fangs. Naomi pressed herself harder against the tree, knowing there was nowhere else to run. The forest was dark, the trail lost somewhere behind her. She climbed as high as she could, but the wolves had followed, patient and determined. "Please," she whispered, though to whom she was praying, she couldn't say. Her family's God seemed very far from this wild place. The lead wolf crouched, muscles tensing beneath its gray fur. Naomi closed her eyes. The crack of gunfire split the night. Then another shot. And another. Naomi's eyes flew open as the wolves scattered, yelping as they melted into the darkness. 3 more shots followed, ensuring the predators kept running. The acrid smell of gunpowder drifted through the crisp mountain air. "You all right, madam?" a deep voice called from below. Naomi's legs nearly gave out with relief. She peered down the slope to see a tall figure approaching on horseback, rifle still raised, scanning the trees for any wolves that might return. "Yes," she managed, her voice trembling. "Yes, I'm alive." The horseman dismounted with fluid grace and began climbing toward her. As he drew nearer, moonlight revealed a man in his early 30s, broad-shouldered and lean. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw darkened with stubble. "Name's Brody Garrett," he said, holstering his revolver and extending a hand. "Most folks around here call me Garrett." "Naomi Reed," she replied, reaching for his hand. Her fingers were ice-cold against his warm, callous palm. "I was headed to Silverdale. The stagecoach broke down, and I thought I could walk, but Silverdale's a good 8 miles from here," he interrupted, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "And these hills ain't kind to strangers after sundown." Naomi's shoulders slumped. I realized that now. Brody studied her for a moment, then glanced at the darkening sky. "My cabin's about a mile from here. You can stay the night, and I'll take you to town at first light." Naomi hesitated. Her mother's warnings about strange men echoed in her mind, but the alternative was the wolves or something worse finding her again in the darkness. "I promise you'll be safe," Brody added, seeming to read her thoughts. "I've got a spare room. It ain't much, but it's dry and warm." "Thank you," Naomi said finally. "I don't have many options, do I?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No, madam, you surely don't." He helped her down the slope to where his horse waited, a magnificent buckskin stallion that nickered softly as they approached. "This is Dusty," Brody said, patting the horse's neck. "He's the one who heard the wolves. Smarter than most men I know." Brody lifted Naomi onto the saddle with surprising gentleness, then mounted behind her. She stiffened at the proximity, but found herself grateful for the warmth of his body as they set off through the forest. The cabin appeared after what seemed like an eternity of silence, broken only by the sound of Dusty's hooves and the occasional distant howl that made Naomi's blood run cold. It was a simple log structure with a small front porch and chimney, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Inside, Brody lit a lantern, revealing a tidy, sparse interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, opposite a small kitchen area with a cast iron stove. A wooden table with 2 chairs sat in the center, and 2 doors led to what Naomi assumed were bedrooms. "Make yourself comfortable," Brody said, gesturing to a chair as he moved to stoke the banked fire. "I'll get this going again." Naomi sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. She watched Brody work, noting the efficient way he moved, the strength in his hands as he arranged kindling and logs. "Are you a rancher, Mr. Garrett?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Just Garrett is fine," he replied without looking up. "And no, not exactly. I run a small outfit guiding hunting parties, do some trapping in winter. Silverdale's the closest town, but I don't get there much. I'm to be the new schoolteacher there," Naomi said. "They wrote that they'd been without one for nearly a year." Brody glanced at her then, his eyes she could now see they were a deep blue assessing. "You're a long way from wherever you came from." "Boston," she admitted. "And yes, it feels very far away tonight." The fire caught, casting a warm glow throughout the cabin. Brody stood and moved to the stove. "Hungry? I've got some stew I can heat up." Naomi nodded gratefully. "Very. Thank you." While Brody prepared the meal, Naomi took stock of her surroundings. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that surprised her: classics, history, even poetry. Not what she'd expected from a mountain man. "You like to read?" she observed. Brody shrugged. "Long winters up here. Man's got to occupy his mind somehow." They ate in relative silence, the stew venison with wild onions and potatoes warming Naomi's insides. After dinner, Brody showed her to the spare room, a small space with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window. "It ain't much," he said, sounding almost apologetic. "It's perfect," Naomi replied sincerely. "I can't thank you enough." Something flickered across his face, discomfort, perhaps, at her gratitude. "Get some rest, Miss Reed. We'll head out at first light." Sleep came surprisingly easily despite the strange surroundings. Naomi dreamed of wolves and gunfire, but also of strong hands and blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Morning arrived with the scent of coffee and bacon. Naomi found Brody already dressed and cooking breakfast, his hat hanging on a peg by the door. In daylight, she could see him clearly for the first time, tall and weathered by the elements, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. The stubble on his jaw was peppered with gray despite his relatively young age. "Morning," he said, glancing up. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," she admitted, smoothing her rumpled dress. "May I help with anything?" He shook his head. "Already done. Eat up, and we'll get you to Silverdale." Over breakfast, Naomi found herself curious about the solitary man who'd saved her life. "Have you always lived alone out here?" Brody's expression closed slightly. "Not always. But for a good while now." "I'm sorry," she said, sensing a story he didn't want to tell. "I didn't mean to pry." "No harm in asking," he replied, his tone softening. "Most folks do. They can't understand why anyone would choose this life." "And why do you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Brody considered her for a moment. "Out here, things are simpler. No pretending. Nature doesn't care who your family is or what mistakes you've made. She'll kill you just the same if you're careless, whether you're a saint or a sinner." The rawness of his answer surprised her. "I can understand wanting that kind of honesty." His eyes met hers, curious now. "What brings a Boston lady to teach in a mining town like Silverdale? Can't imagine it was your first choice." Naomi looked down at her plate. "I needed a fresh start." "Running from something?" There was no judgment in his voice. "Or towards something," she countered. "A life that's mine to shape." Brody nodded slowly. "Fair enough." The ride to Silverdale took nearly 2 hours, during which they fell into an easier conversation. Naomi told him about her training as a teacher, her passion for literature, and her hopes for her students. Brody shared stories of the mountains, the best fishing spots, the changing of seasons, the wildlife that shared his domain. As they crested a hill, Silverdale came into view, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, nestled in a valley between towering peaks. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance, Naomi could see people moving about, starting their day. "There it is," Brody said. "Your new home." Something like regret flickered through Naomi. Their time together was ending, and despite the circumstances of their meeting, she found herself reluctant to part ways with this quiet, thoughtful man. "Will you come into town?" she asked. Brody shook his head. "Better not. Got traps to check." They rode down into the valley, and as they reached the outskirts of town, Brody finally slowed Dusty to a stop. "The schoolhouse is just past the church," he said, pointing. "The mayor's wife, Mrs. Whitaker, was supposed to meet the stagecoach. She'll be looking for you." Naomi slid down from the saddle, accepting Brody's help. When her feet touched the ground, she didn't immediately let go of his hand. "I don't know how to thank you," she said earnestly. "You saved my life." Brody's eyes softened. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Naomi insisted. "Not everyone would have taken in a stranger, fed her, and escorted her safely to town." A hint of color touched his cheeks. "Well, good luck with your teaching, Miss Reed." "Naomi," she corrected. "Please call me Naomi." He nodded once, then tipped his hat. "Good luck, Naomi." As she watched him ride away, Naomi felt a strange emptiness, as if something valuable had slipped through her fingers before she'd recognized its worth. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Naomi was welcomed warmly by the townsfolk, who seemed genuinely grateful to have a teacher for their children. She settled into a small room above the general store and threw herself into preparing the neglected schoolhouse for the upcoming term. But in quiet moments, her thoughts drifted to Brody Garrett and his isolated cabin. She found herself scanning the streets whenever she went out, hoping for a glimpse of him, but he never appeared. "Garrett doesn't come to town much," explained Martha Whitaker, the mayor's wife, when Naomi finally worked up the courage to ask about him. "Been that way since he lost his wife and daughter to scarlet fever 5 years back." The revelation struck Naomi like a physical blow. "I had no idea." Martha nodded sadly. "Took off into the mountains after the funeral. Barely spoke to anyone for 2 years. He's better now, but he keeps to himself. Good man, though. Helps out when someone's in trouble." "Yes," Naomi murmured. "He does." Autumn arrived, painting the mountains in brilliant golds and reds. School began with 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Naomi found joy in teaching them, watching their minds open to new ideas, but something was missing. One evening in late October, as Naomi was locking up the schoolhouse, a familiar figure on horseback appeared at the edge of town. Her heart leaped at the sight of Brody, looking much as he had the night they'd met, though his face was freshly shaven. He dismounted as she approached, hat in hand. "Miss Reed." "Mr. Garrett," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "What brings you to town?" "Supplies," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the general store. "And well, I wanted to see how you were settling in." "Very well," she assured him. "The children are wonderful, and everyone has been kind." Brody nodded, seemingly satisfied. An awkward silence fell between them. "Would you?" Naomi began. "I was wondering," Brody said simultaneously. They both laughed, the tension breaking. "Please," Naomi gestured for him to continue. "I was wondering if you might like to have dinner," Brody said, the words coming out in a rush. "At the hotel restaurant. They do a decent steak." Joy bubbled up in Naomi's chest. "I would like that very much." That dinner was the first of many meetings over the following months. Brody began coming to town more frequently, first monthly, then bi-weekly, finally weekly. Each time, he would appear at the schoolhouse as Naomi was finishing for the day, and they would walk together, talking about books, her students, his adventures in the mountains. Sometimes they would sit on the schoolhouse steps until twilight descended, lost in conversation. Other times they would have dinner at the hotel, acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk and used to seeing the reclusive mountain man in their midst. As winter settled over the mountains, their friendship deepened. Naomi learned about the wife and daughter he had lost, Emily and little Sarah, who had been only 4 when the fever took her. Brody, in turn, learned about Naomi's broken engagement to a banker's son who had wanted her to give up teaching once they were married. "I couldn't do it," she confessed one snowy evening as they sat by the fire in the hotel's small parlor. "Teaching isn't just what I do, it's who I am. Man who'd ask you to give that up doesn't deserve you," Brody said with unexpected fierceness. Their first kiss came on Christmas Eve, after the school pageant. Naomi had organized the nativity play, and Brody had slipped into the back of the church to watch. Afterward, as the townspeople dispersed to their homes, they walked together in the gently falling snow. "You've changed this town," Brody said quietly. "Those kids adore you." Naomi blushed. "I only hope I'm teaching them well. You're teaching them to think for themselves. That's more valuable than any arithmetic." They had stopped walking, standing beneath the bare branches of an oak tree. Snowflakes caught in Naomi's eyelashes, and Brody reached up to gently brush them away. His hand lingered on her cheek. "Naomi," he whispered, her name a question. She answered by rising on her tiptoes, her lips meeting his in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and she felt truly at home for the first time since arriving in Colorado. Winter passed in a haze of stolen moments. Brody began staying in town overnight when he visited, taking a room at the hotel. The townsfolk watched their courtship with approval. Garrett was well respected despite his reclusiveness, and they had all grown fond of their dedicated teacher. With spring's arrival came new challenges. Brody's guiding business picked up, taking him away for days at a time with hunting parties from Denver and beyond. Naomi was busy preparing her students for their year-end examinations. In late April, Brody appeared at the schoolhouse with a troubled expression. "What is it?" Naomi asked as they walked along the creek that ran behind the town. "Got offered a job," he said. "Army needs guides for a surveying expedition in Montana Territory. 6 months' work, good pay." Naomi's heart sank. "When would you leave?" "Next week, if I take it." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Will you take it?" Brody ran a hand through his hair, his conflict evident. "I don't know. Been thinking I might be ready for a change." "A change?" Naomi echoed, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Not from you," he clarified quickly. "Never from you. But maybe from being alone all the time." "You're not alone anymore," she reminded him softly. He took her hands in his. "No, I'm not. That's why I'm asking what you want, Naomi. If you want me to stay, I'll stay." The weight of his words settled around her. "I can't make that decision for you, Brody. You wouldn't be. You'd be helping me make it." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I love you, Naomi. Have since that first morning in my cabin, when you talked about moving towards something instead of running away. I just didn't know how to say it then." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes. "I love you too. Then marry me," he said simply. "Not because of Montana or any job, but because I can't imagine my life without you now." "Yes," she whispered, and then louder. "Yes, I'll marry you." His smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and grief. He kissed her then, in the open daylight, not caring who might see. They were married 2 weeks later in Silverdale's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Naomi wore a simple white dress ordered from Denver, and Brody wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. The mayor gave the bride away, and Mrs. Whitaker wept openly throughout the ceremony. Brody didn't take the Montana job. Instead, he built a new cabin closer to town, where Naomi could easily travel to the schoolhouse each day. He expanded his guiding business to include teaching wilderness skills to city dwellers eager for adventure, allowing him to be home most nights. Summer arrived, bringing with it lush greenery and wildflowers that carpeted the mountain meadows. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home watching the sunset paint the peaks in gold and crimson, Brody took Naomi's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming west, ending up here instead of some fancy city school?" Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder. "Never. Not for a moment. Even with the wolves?" There was a teasing note in his voice. "Especially with the wolves," she replied, smiling up at him. "If not for them, we might never have met." "I'd have found you somehow," Brody said with certainty. "Some things are just meant to be." As twilight deepened into night, bringing with it the first stars and the distant howl of wolves, Naomi reflected on the strange path that had led her here. From Boston drawing rooms to a mountain cabin, from a frightened woman cornered by predators to a wife deeply in love, the journey had been unexpected but perfect in its way. The following winter brought heavy snows and the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Emma Sarah Garrett. Brody held the tiny infant with tears streaming unashamedly down his face, whispering promises of protection and love. "She has your eyes," Naomi observed from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "And your spirit, I'd wager," Brody replied, carefully placing the baby in her arms. "God help us when she starts talking." Naomi laughed. "She'll be reading before she can walk if I have anything to say about it." Their family grew in the years that followed. A son, Benjamin, arrived 2 years after Emma, and another daughter, Rose, 3 years after that. Naomi continued teaching, bringing the babies with her when they were small. As the children grew, they joined her students at the schoolhouse. Brody's business thrived as Silverdale expanded with the arrival of the railroad. He built a reputation as the finest guide in Colorado Territory, but he never forgot the lessons of his years of solitude, the value of simplicity, honesty, and living in harmony with the wild land around them. On the 10th anniversary of the night they met, Brody surprised Naomi with a special dinner at their cabin, sending the children to stay with the Whitakers in town. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a wolf. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the detail remarkable. "Brody, it's beautiful," Naomi breathed, touching the piece gently. "Had it made in Denver," he explained. "Seemed fitting somehow." "Perfect," she agreed, pinning it to her dress. "Our beginning." Brody took her hand, his expression growing serious. "I've been thinking about that night a lot lately. How different everything would have been if I hadn't heard those wolves, if Dusty hadn't gotten spooked. We can't know what might have been," Naomi said gently. "Only what is. And what is pretty damn wonderful." He smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling. At 43, there was more gray in his hair now, but his eyes were still as bright and clear as the mountain sky. Naomi, now 35, felt the same flutter in her heart when he looked at her as she had that first morning in his cabin. "I wouldn't change a thing." "Not even the wolves?" he teased. "Especially not the wolves," she replied, leaning across the table to kiss him. "After all, every good love story needs a little danger." Outside, as if on cue, a distant howl echoed through the mountains. Brody and Naomi smiled at each other, remembering the fear and the gunfire that had brought them together, grateful for the life they had built from that chaotic beginning. Years later, when their children were grown with families of their own, when Silverdale had transformed from a mining town to a thriving community, Brody and Naomi would still sometimes sit on their porch at twilight, listening for the wolves. They were fewer now, as civilization pushed deeper into the wilderness, but they were still their resilient, adaptable survivors. Like the love that had blossomed on that moonlit night when a frightened Boston schoolteacher and a solitary mountain man had found each other against all odds, the wolves endured. And in their distant howls, Brody and Naomi heard not a threat, but a reminder of the wild, unpredictable beauty of life and the remarkable ways that love could find its path through even the darkest forest.